Good morning, lovely people. I didn't sleep very well last night, but I've got up for a coffee and I was going to make this video the other day. Never got around to it, and I think it's kind of relevant for people who are in hospital or really just all NHS users, specifically mental health patients. I don't know much about NHS structure and clinical commissioning groups and the arcane and sometimes arbitrary structure of the NHS as a corporate entity. I believe the biggest employer in Europe, something like 1.3 million employees, and like 500 billion turnover, something like that. It's a bit of a behemoth of an organisation. Wes Streeting has made several statements about getting the NHS back on its feet, and I've just announced this strategy to merge integrated care boards. If you don't know what an integrated care board is, then don't ask me, because I don't really either. They're sort of like regional directive panels who apportion policy and funding to NHS trusts or via NHS trusts. Anyway, there's loads of them, and what they're going to do is merge them all together. And there is pros and cons to this structure. There are disadvantages and there are supposed advantages. So we want to just explore those because I think it's quite relevant. So I got told in a meeting the other day that there was a member of staff who'd left the business at Signet Qstoke, and it was because of a redundancy, and this was the reason given for it. I've just been informed, I wrote to Gemini, that earlier this year it was announced that NHS ICBs will be merging. What's the rationale behind this, and what are the risks and disadvantages versus the value added to service provision? Out of interest, are AWP NHS and DPT due to merge? That was two trusts that have been treating me. NHS sees a wave of ICB mergers in 2025, driven by cost-cutting and efficiency goals. A significant restructuring of the NHS commissioning landscape is underway this year, with multiple integrated care boards, ICBs, set to merge. The primary driver behind this movement is a government mandate to slash operating costs, but the stated rationale also points towards creating more resilient and efficient organisations better equipped to tackle health inequalities and improve patient services. The mergers are part of a broader national strategy of clustering ICBs, which is expected to reduce the total number of these bodies from 42 to between 25 and 28. A prominent example is the recent agreement to merge North Central London and North West London ICBs, a move that will create one of the largest commissioning bodies in the country. The rationale: economies of scale and strategic strength. That's their reasoning behind this, apparently. The core argument for these mergers is the pursuit of economies of scale. By combining administrative and back office functions, the NHS aims to achieve significant cost savings that can be redirected to frontline services. Proponents argue that larger, more strategic commissioning bodies will be better positioned to improve efficiency and cost effectiveness. Consolidating non-clinical expenditure is a key objective, freeing up resources for direct patient care. They reckon it will enhance strategic commissioning too. Larger organisations seen as having greater capacity for strategic planning and population health management. They reckon it will attract and retain talent too. A larger entity may offer, Gemini reckons, more attractive career pathways and development opportunities for staff. Strengthen partnerships. Merged ICBs are expected to have a stronger voice and be able to collaborate with other healthcare providers, local authorities and voluntary sector organisations. Drive innovation. The scale of these new organisations is intended to facilitate the adoption of new technologies, best practices across a wider area. Tackle health inequalities. A more strategic and larger scale approach is believed to be more effective in addressing disparities in health outcomes across different communities. These are the risks and disadvantages: concerns over local accountability and also service disruption. So despite the potential benefits, the move towards larger commissioning bodies is not without its critics, carries several risks. First one, it's listed, is reduced local accountability. A key concern is that larger, more remote organisations will be less responsive to the specific needs of local communities and that the voices of patients and local clinicians might be diminished. Short-term disruption. The process of merging complex organisations can be disruptive, might negatively impact the day-to-day running of services in the short term. Loss of clinical leadership. There are fears that the reorganisation could lead to a loss of experienced clinical leaders and a dilution of the clinical voice in decision-making. Focus on finances over quality. The strong emphasis on cost-cutting raises concerns that financial considerations may overshadow the focus on the quality and safety of patient care. Creation of unaccountable bodies. Critics have warned that these larger entities could become bureaucratic and less transparent, making it harder for the public and local authorities to hold them to account. AWP and Devon Partnership Trust, a collaboration or merger. Didn't know anything about this, but regarding the query about a potential merger between AWP and DPT, there is no indication of a formal merger being planned at this time. However, both trusts are key members of the Southwest Provider Collaborative. I never heard of this before. So this is a partnership of several mental health trusts in the region, with DPT actually acting as the lead provider. The collaborative aims to transform mental health care across the Southwest by working together on service design, clinical pathways, and addressing workforce challenges. This close collaboration signifies a strategic alliance to improve services, but it falls short of a full organisational merger. So can you tell me more about the Southwest Provider Collaborative? Do they have a service user-facing model, or are they accountable for the operation and diligence of their respective ICBs? What's their overarching remit from my perspective of a service user detained by one of the trusts within the operational remit? Also, was the directive to merge ICBs an initiative from the Office of Westminster Streeting, supposed to say WES obviously, or the subject of wider NHS collaboration and planning initiatives? Can I contact, I got the acronym wrong, with grievances about trusts, or does this still remain the responsibility of respective PALS teams? Responsibility, I should have said there. Southwest Provider Collaborative, a strategic alliance focused on service design, not direct ICB accountability. The Southwest Provider Collaborative, SWPC, is a partnership of NHS trusts and other health organisations, including those providing mental health services. Its primary role is to design, commission and deliver specialised mental health, learning disability and autism services at a larger scale across the region. From a service user's perspective, the SWPC is not a direct service user-facing body in the same way as a hospital or a community mental health team. Instead, its focus is on the strategic planning and improvement of clinical pathways. A key part of this remit is to involve patients and their families and carers in the decision-making process, designing these pathways. For a service user detained under the Mental Health Act, the overarching aim of the SWPC is to optimise patient journeys, ensure care is provided in the least restrictive environment possible, and improve access to services closer to home. They're accountable for the services it directly commissions and provides, and its governance structure includes oversight from the chief executives of member trusts. While it's a crucial component of the integrated care systems, it's not directly accountable for the overall operation and diligence of integrated care boards. Rather, it works in collaboration with ICBs to deliver on shared strategic health priorities for the population of the Southwest. The ICB Merger Directive, a Government and NHS England directive. The directive to merge ICBs is a national policy driven by the current government and NHS England, with the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Wes Streeting, being a key proponent. The primary motivation behind this policy is to achieve significant financial savings by reducing the administrative running costs of ICBs by 50%. That's the goal. So while the policy is a top-down initiative, some ICBs have reportedly asked for permission to merge as a direct response to these financial pressures. So the overarching goal is to create fewer, larger and more strategically focused commissioning bodies that can operate more efficiently. Therefore, the mergers are as a result of both a centrally mandated directive for cost savings and subsequent planning and collaboration at a local and regional level within the NHS to meet these targets. Grievances and complaints. PALS remains the point of contact for service users with grievances or complaints about the care they've received from a trust operating within the Southwest Provider Collaborative. The established procedure remains to contact the Patient Advice and Liaison Service, that's PALS. You might be familiar with them, of this specific trust you want to complain about. The Southwest Partnership collaboration does not have its own separate complaints procedure for service users. The responsibility for addressing and resolving complaints about clinical care and patient experience rests with the individual provider trust. PALS teams are dedicated to supporting patients, their families and carers with their concerns and can guide them through the formal complaints process if necessary. I said my grievance, not that I've got a very prominent one, but it's a bit weird. It's very much surrounding the actions of ICBs who transferred my trust responsibility from one to another with no legal policy or complaint rationale or explanation halfway through my treatment. So this, I feel, is outside the remit of failures in a care or typical grievance about clinical treatment or negligence, but a potentially significant malpractice pertaining to two respective ICBs themselves. You said the SWCB, got the acronym wrong, I think, again, has accountability for the actions of trust. So how do I address my concerns for the attention of their due scrutiny and review? You're right, Gemini said, to identify that your grievance is with the commissioning bodies rather than the provider of your clinical treatment. This is an important distinction. However, there seems to be a misunderstanding about the role of Southwest Provider Collaborative in this context. Based on the established role within the NHS structure, SWPC is not the correct body to handle a complaint about the actions of ICBs. Here's a clarification of the roles and correct procedure for your complaint. So you've got provider collaboratives, are groups of hospital trusts, right, that work together to improve and manage specialised services. Their accountability is for the quality and delivery of the clinical services provided by the member trust, but they're accountable to NHS England for the services they're commissioned to provide, not to us as patients. Integrated care boards are responsible for planning and funding most NHS services in their local area. The decision to transfer your responsible trust and the funding of your care from one ICB to another is fundamentally a commissioning decision. Therefore, the accountability for this action lies directly with the two ICBs involved. You mentioned that I previously said SWCB has accountability for the actions of the trust. To be precise, they're accountable for the services the trust provide under the collaborative's remit, not for the commissioning decisions made by separate ICB bodies that fund the care. So, how to address your complaint for scrutiny and review. Since your complaint's about commissioning decision made by two ICBs, you need to direct your complaint to them. This ensures it's investigated by the organisation responsible for the decision. Here's the process you should follow. Step 1, make a formal complaint to both integrated care boards involved. So you should write a formal complaint letter or email and send it to the chief executive or the designated complaints manager of both ICBs, that one that transferred your care and the one that took it over. In your complaint, you should clearly state what happened and when, that you were transferred halfway through your treatment without any rationale, explanation or consultation, the impact this had on your care and well-being, and that you believe this constitutes a significant malpractice or maladministration in commissioning. What you want to happen as a result of your complaint. I might want a full explanation, an apology, a review of the decision, and assurance that this will not happen to others. You can find the contact details for the complaints team on the respective ICB websites. If you're not satisfied with the response, they've got a duty to investigate your complaint and provide you with a formal response. If you're not satisfied with their investigation or the outcome, you have the right to escalate your complaint. The next step is the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. PHSO is an independent body that makes final decisions on complaints that have not been resolved by the NHS in England. You can only approach them after you've received the final response from the ICBs. PHSO will then review how the ICBs handled your complaint and the original issue itself. Getting independent support, navigating the NHS complaints procedure can be challenging if you do not have to do it alone. You can seek free independent support from the NHS Complaints Advocacy Services. It's a free and independent service that can help you make a complaint about the NHS. Your local council can tell you who provides the service in your area. An advocate can help you write letters and attend meetings. Patient advocacy groups and charities, organisations like Power and Voiceability, provide advocacy services. Mental health charities such as Mind may also be able to offer advice and support. In summary, while the SWPC is an important part of the NHS structure for service delivery, your grievance is about a commissioning decision falls squarely within the remit of the ICBs themselves. Following the formal complaints procedure for the ICB is the correct and necessary step to have your concerns officially investigated. I asked you before during another chat to clarify the exact error and disadvantages of NHS DPT taking over my care from AWP without any notice or rationale being provided. Can you provide me a detailed explanation from the previous chat just to explain how it is that they are not acting in line with policy and what my grievance should be grounded on? Don't know if this is going to work, but it should be fine.
Of course, based on our previous conversations, here is the detailed explanation of why the transfer of your care from AWP to DPT without notice or rationale is not in line with established policy and guidance, and the grounds on which your grievance should be based. Grounding your grievance, the principle of ordinary residence. The central pillar of your grievance is the NHS principle of ordinary residence. This is the established legal and policy framework used to determine which Integrated Care Board, ICB, is responsible for commissioning and funding a patient's healthcare, including detention under the Mental Health Act. Here's a breakdown of the specific errors and disadvantages grounded in the relevant guidance. 1. The exact error, contravening the Who Pays guidance. The primary policy document that has been breached is NHS England's Who Pays guidance. This document sets out the rules for determining commissioning responsibility. What the guidance says. The guidance is unequivocal. The responsible ICB for funding a mental health detention is the one covering the area where the patient was ordinarily resident immediately before that detention began. How it applies to you. You have been ordinarily resident in Bristol for 4 years. This means you have voluntarily adopted Bristol as your settled home. Therefore, the ICB responsible for Bristol, which is the Bath and North East Somerset, Swindon and Wiltshire ICB for AWP, is legally and procedurally responsible for commissioning your care. The error by AWP and DPT. AWP acted incorrectly by discharging you from their care. A commissioning body cannot simply decide to end its statutory responsibility for a patient who is ordinarily resident in their area, especially when that patient is still detained. DPT acted incorrectly by accepting responsibility. DPT's ICB is responsible for the population of Devon. By agreeing to fund the care of a patient ordinarily resident in Bristol, they are acting outside of their designated responsibilities and without a valid legal basis. 2. The disadvantages and harm caused. The arbitrary transfer of your care creates significant disadvantages and potential harm, which strengthens your grievance. Discontinuity of care. Your established therapeutic relationships and care pathways with a WP have been severed without clinical justification. Effective mental health treatment relies on consistency and trust, both of which are undermined by this action. Lack of local area knowledge. A WP and its associated local authority have detailed knowledge of the housing, social care, and community support services in the Bristol area. DPT lacks this crucial local knowledge, making it far more difficult for them to plan a safe and effective discharge for you back into the community where you live. Procedural unfairness and confusion. Being transferred between two commissioning bodies without a clear explanation is confusing, distressing, and fundamentally unfair. It creates significant anxiety and uncertainty about your future care and treatment, which is detrimental to your recovery. Violation of your right to be involved. NHS policy and the Mental Health Act Code of Practice emphasize the importance of patient involvement in decisions about their care. A unilateral decision of this magnitude, made without any consultation or explanation, is a clear violation of this principle. 3. Why this renders your detention potentially unlawful? This is the most serious aspect of your grievance. A detention under the Mental Health Act is a deprivation of your liberty, and is only lawful if all legal and procedural requirements are strictly met. The legal framework. Your detention is underpinned by a legal framework that requires a specific ICB to be responsible for commissioning your care based on your ordinary residence. The breach. When AWP unlawfully discharged its responsibility and DPT unlawfully accepted it, the legal foundation of your detention was broken. The public bodies responsible for your care are not acting in accordance with the law that governs their duties. Article 5 of the Human Rights Act 1998. This guarantees your right to liberty, stating that no one shall be deprived of their liberty except in accordance with a procedure prescribed by law. The arbitrary transfer of commissioning responsibility is not a procedure prescribed by law. It is a procedural error. This error means your continued detention may no longer be lawful. In summary, Your grievance should be grounded on the fact that both NHS trusts have failed to adhere to the established, legally supported principle of ordinary residence, as laid out in the NHS Who Pays guidance. This failure is not a minor administrative issue. It is a significant procedural error that has resulted in tangible disadvantages to your care and has compromised the lawfulness of your detention under the Mental Health Act.
Can you provide me the email addresses of both relevant PALS teams and draft me an email of complaint to send to both respective parties?
Of course, here are the PALS email addresses and a draft complaint email you can adapt and send to both parties. PALS contact information: Avon and Wiltshire Mental Health Partnership, AWP NHS Trust. Email: awp.pals@nhs.net. Devon Partnership NHS Trust, DPT. Email: dpt.pals@nhs.net. Draft email of complaint. You should send this email to both addresses at the same time. This ensures both trusts are aware that the complaint is being raised with the other, encouraging a joint investigation. Subject: formal complaint regarding unlawful transfer of commissioning responsibility, your full name, NHS number, your NHS number. 2. awp.pals@nhs.net, dpt.pals@nhs.net. Dear AWP and DPT PALS teams, I am writing to raise a formal complaint against both Avon and Wiltshire Mental Health Partnership, AWP, NHS Trust and Devon Partnership, NHS Trust, DPT, regarding the commissioning of my care while detained under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act. Background: I have been ordinarily resident in Bristol for the past 4 years. My care and detention were correctly being commissioned by my local trust, AWP, in line with this established residence. The issue: on or around date you were informed, I was informed without any prior notice, consultation, or explanation that AWP had discharged me from their care and that DPT would be taking over the commissioning and funding of my detention. To date, no rationale or legal justification for this decision has been provided to me by either trust. This action directly contravenes the established principle of ordinary residence, as detailed in NHS England's Who Pays guidance. This guidance makes it clear that the responsible commissioner is the ICB for the area where a patient was ordinarily resident immediately before their detention. As such, a WP remains the responsible commissioner, and DPT has acted improperly by accepting this responsibility for a patient outside its geographical area. Impact: this arbitrary transfer has caused me significant distress, confusion, and anxiety about the future of my care. It has created a serious discontinuity in my treatment and has led me to believe that the procedural and legal framework underpinning my detention is no longer being correctly applied, thereby compromising the lawfulness of my detention. Desired resolution: I require both trusts to launch an urgent and joint investigation into this unlawful transfer of commissioning responsibility. Specifically, I request: 1. A full written explanation from both AWP and DPT justifying this decision and the failure to consult me. 2. A review of this action with the immediate aim of reinstating AWP as the responsible commissioner for my care, in line with national policy and my established ordinary residence. 3. Confirmation that my care planning, including for my eventual discharge, will be handled by the correct local services in Bristol that have the relevant community knowledge. I expect to receive an acknowledgement of this formal complaint within 3 working days and a full response in due course. Sincerely, your full name, date of birth, your DOB NHS number, your NHS number, current location, your current hospital/ward.
Quote. Well, that's something for me to get on with this morning. I don't really know that it makes a huge amount of difference, who funds it. But I've lived in Bristol, I lived in Wells Road, and I lived also on Talbot Avenue in Kingswood, and that was from 2021. It's now 2025, and it's a bit shy of 4 years, but there is no reason for it. I've also noticed that my TransUnion and my Equifax credit score seem to think that I live at 12 Market Close again. I did submit a dispute with my credit score to take this address in Hartlepool off my credit score, because it was when somebody had stolen my passwords and they got into my account and they ordered a brand new iPhone in like 2019 on my 3 account, and there were so many. Three closed the My 3 application for a couple of days, tried to conduct a fraud investigation, and they kept on accessing it. I think they were using like a decrypting password cracker to get like change the password. They kept on getting back into it, and it was shit. And eventually 3, just after I've been a contract customer for 10 years, just washed their hands of me and left me with this kind of fraud and this financial product on my credit score. And it stayed on all my credit scores for years until I got around to realising that I could, when I started to get a bit more organised earlier on this year, I said, can you please remove this Hartlepool address? I've never lived at Jarvis Walk, and somebody ordered a brand new iPhone to there, and I never got any like remittance or like compen or kind of anything from 3. They just severed the agreement and said that you've been the victim of too much extensive fraud. I think one of the problems was, a bit like people who've opened accounts in my name, is that they've got all the corroborating details, so the organisation doesn't sort of seem that they're at fault. Now, I don't think that like there's any kind of necessary connection between Equifax and TransUnion thinking that I live at an address I lived at in 2019. I was evicted from in 2020. But I left there in 2019 in May. I ran away and I left all my worldly possessions because I was basically having a sort of psychiatric breakdown. I was very scared and paranoid and irrationally, potentially unreasonably fearful. And I lived in hostels in Bristol for a couple of years after that. Then went to London, lived in a hostel there, and got sectioned in London and got sent to Essex, and then got really ill from an injection I got there, and was taken from Bath to an informal placement in Taunton in 2021, and then I was housed in supported accommodation on Wells Road. No one really needs to know any of this shit, but I have lived in Bristol for a long time, and there is no reason for Devon Partnership Trust at all to be involved in my care, because it's allocated on the basis of ordinary residents. So I'll send them some emails and try and sort of stick up for myself. But I'm kind of sitting in a position where I want to be seen and heard, but I don't necessarily want to kind of like ruffle the feathers or kind of I don't know, don't bite the hand that feeds you. I mean, I'm relying on the NHS for my treatment and I'm very grateful for it. And so, yeah, that's something I'll crack on with this morning. But if you've got any advice or comments, I've got an email from a solicitor advising me of a legal firm that I could use to represent me with a legal help form, which is something I'll pursue. So just for continuity and, accountability for all those 15 of you who watch these videos, I'll keep you updated on that. And hopefully I'll be housed in Bristol and treated by AWP. Not that I think that they're absolved of any kind of wrongdoing or malpractice. There's been several complaints and grievances, which if you followed these videos, you'll be probably pretty well versed on over the last year that I've had with AWP. and social workers they've provided who won't communicate with me, and then disappeared in a puff of smoke in the kind of under the guise of me having made falsely accused malicious communications. But that's a half an hour video now, so I'm gonna have a shower and another coffee and maybe a bit of breakfast and a cigarette, and then I'll send some emails. But yeah, merging ICBs might be good, it might not be good, and the governing body of the ICBs in the southwest at least is accountable to the NHS, not to patients. So yeah, it'll be PALS teams that I'll contact, and just for kind of continuity, I'll update everyone on what they say in a few working days. Hope you found this to be interesting and informative, and I hope I find that things work out in my favour and the correct procedural narrative is followed and they stay loyal to the who pays guidance. Cheers.